Hello, my name is Mason Zemp. I'm part of the Rabies group. I'll be going over the etiology, bacterial diseases, and the viral diseases.
Hi, I'm Sarah Coley. I'm going to be going over the typical reservoirs of the rabies virus.
Hello, my name is Noah Burnell. I am part of the Rabies virus presentation group. I will be covering the topics of prevention, treatment, and additional information.
Hey everyone, I'm Haley, and I'll be taking you through transmission and signs and symptoms of the rabies virus. So let's dive in.
Etiology is the science and study of causes of disease and their mode of operation. The preferred scientific name for rabies is the rabies virus. Rabies virus belongs to the order of the mononegative virals. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Which are viruses with a non-segmented negative-stranded RNA genome. Rabies virus can be further classified as belonging to the Rhabdoviridae family of viruses and the genus Lassa-virus. There are several variations of the rabies virus that can cause rabies. As you can see, there's a few that are part of this genus Lassa-virus. Bacterial diseases. The gram stain. Since rabies is not a bacteria and is a virus and is considered to be non-living and does not contain peptidoglycan, therefore it is neither negative or positive for its gram stain. Morphology. Morphology is the study of the form and structure of animals and plants. The morphology of the rabies virus is bacilliform, or rod, and is bullet-shaped. It is non-motile, but still is able to travel to the nervous system. As stated before, the unique structures is its bullet-shaped design. Viral diseases. The morphology is enveloped, and its viral genome is an RNA virus. The most outstanding characteristic of the rhabdovirus is the bullet-shaped viron. Such a shape is caused by a lipid envelope embedded with glycoprotein peptidomers surrounding a helical wound nucleocapsid. The virons tend to be approximately 70 nanometers wide and 170 nanometers long. Matrix proteins can also be found under the lipoprotein envelope.
Alright, I think it's easier to understand the stages of this particular disease when we understand its transmission. And so I thought I'd start with that. I think most of us know how this starts. For starters, the virus, which is usually carried in an infected animal's saliva, is introduced into the muscle via a bite. That's the most common transmission. However, you actually can get infected if you get their blood or their saliva in your eyes or in your mouth. From the bite site, it travels up the peripheral nervous pathways to the spinal cord and eventually makes it to the brain. This lapse in time, which is called the incubation period, in which the animal doesn't experience any symptoms, and it can actually last anywhere from a few weeks to a few months, so you can actually be bit, have the virus, and not have any symptoms for quite a while. An interesting fact on this, if an infected animal were to bite another during the incubation period, it's unlikely that it would transmit the virus because it has not yet made it to the saliva. Which brings me to my next step in the process. Once the virus has reached the brain, it moves into the salivary glands, and then it rapidly spreads to other organs. Going off that, I'll tell you a little more about the signs and symptoms. Okay, so once the virus does reach the brain, it begins to multiply rapidly, causing encephalitis. In the early stages of the disease, symptoms can actually be relatively benign flu-like symptoms, such as malaise, fever, headaches. Really the only thing that may be peculiar is an itching or strange sensations at the bite site. The victim may experience dysphagia due to involuntary spasms of the respiratory system when they attempt to swallow. They used to call this hydrophobia. They don't call it that anymore since it is a neurological symptom now. So after a few days of just generally not feeling well, those infected begin to take a sharp turn for the worst, and they experience an uptake of acute neurological symptoms. And this can last anywhere from 2 to 3 days. So this is, I think, the most defining part of the disease. There are two types of manifestations of this particular disease. One is called the furious type, and that is definitely the most common, happening in 75% of cases. We begin to see cerebral dysfunction such as, agitation, abnormal behavior, confusion, which progresses to delirium, and then hallucinations. You have a lot of involuntary spasms, rapid breathing, rapid eye movement. Along with this, we see the distinctive, excessive, and often frothy sputum and excessive sweating. In the paralytic manifestation, which is much less common, which is 25% of cases, we see an addition of ascending paralysis from the bite site. And this is due to the pathway the virus takes during the infection process. This form does take longer to kill, and death will eventually be caused by paralysis of the diaphragm. They just can't breathe anymore. And then in the final stage, the encephalitis, due to the thriving virus, becomes so acute the victim will lapse into a coma. Rabies actually compromises the brain's ability to regulate the body's autonomic nervous system functions, such as, the heart rate, salivation, and respiration. And death ultimately occurs due to fatal arrhythmias of the heart, spasms of the diaphragm, or from just plain old drowning in their own saliva. They just can't swallow it all and they're producing so much of it. So from the time that an individual experiences symptoms until they die, that's about 7 days. This is a link to some really good information about rabies if you want to look into it some more.
Typically, rabies is transmitted by wild carnivorous mammals, but actually any mammal can be a reservoir. Common reservoirs include dogs, cats, foxes, skunks, raccoons, bats, and coyotes. Each species catches and passes on a specific variant, which circulates through the species. Transmission of virus variants between species is quite uncommon. If a cat were to be bitten by a rabid raccoon, for instance, the cat would most likely die from the raccoon strain before being able to pass on the disease. The likelihood of catching the virus from a particular reservoir varies with your location. Bats are the most common transmitters in Australia, Europe, and most parts of the United States and Canada. In underdeveloped countries, where rabies vaccines are rare, dogs are the primary transmitters. Because of their high standards in animal importation, many countries in South America are free of rabies altogether. Although rabies in humans can be contagious, there has been no evidence of the virus being passed from human to human.
Okay, so rabies is preventable. However, 55,000 people die from rabies every year. That is one person every 10 minutes. So that's a lot of people dying. So if you're traveling, you should consult with a healthcare provider if you should receive a rabies vaccine, especially if you're going for a long period of time or you're in an area where rabies is very prevalent, say like Africa. Another key to preventing rabies is to avoid trying to touch wild animals. I see a lot of people who just they see a dog or a cat on the street and they're like walking down the street and they want to go pet it. And one of the keys to avoiding, preventing rabies is to not be touching wild animals. I saw a statistic actually that showed that 95% of human rabies cases are due to dog bites. So definitely something to keep in mind when you see a stray dog. Probably shouldn't go touch it. So if you're trying to prevent the spread of rabies, there's a couple of things that should be noted. So if you are a pet owner, you should keep your dogs, cats, ferrets, and other small animals up to date on their rabies vaccines. Another important way to prevent the spread of rabies is kind of through like a community education about rabies vaccines and its importance, not just for humans but also for animals such as pets. Another important key is that you should always report all stray or ill-looking animals to animal control. and kind of just making sure that it's understood that actually unsupervised children are at the highest risk for contracting rabies because they are most likely to be bitten by stray animals that are carrying the disease. And finally, it is also very advisable to avoid contact with bats at all costs. They are heavy carriers of rabies. So when it comes to rabies treatment, if you're bitten by a wild animal, of course you should seek immediate medical attention. Also, another important thing that you should do is the wound that you have, you should wash it with soap for at least 15 minutes. If you believe that you have been infected with the rabies virus, you need to get a series of shots as treatment. There are two types of shot treatments that you can receive. The first is a fast-acting shot, which is called rabies immune globulin, and is injected near where the animal bit you. The second is a series of vaccines in the arm. There'll be 4 of them that you'll have to go through over like a 2-week period or so. Also, it's important to note that if you can't find the animal that bit you, you should be tested for rabies and just kind of assume that you have rabies and start going through the treatment. It's one of those situations that's better to be safe than sorry. And then just some additional information about the rabies virus. Different strains of the rabies virus have been identified in raccoons, skunks, foxes, coyotes, and bats. So there's a lot of different rabies strains. The rabies virus actually, interestingly enough, becomes non-infectious after exposure to sunlight. Another interesting fact that I found was that if you're bitten by an animal, the only way to figure out if that animal has rabies is by looking at the animal's brain tissue. So that animal needs to be caught, and the brain tissue needs to be evaluated. And then just something else that just some basics about the rabies virus. Once infected with rabies, it'll attack nerve cells and travel through the central nervous system, and it'll work its way to the brain. Also, another thing that's important to note is that rabies is an RNA virus, which is important to know when you're trying to understand how it replicates.